And welcome to the winter and spring edition of Krown Countdown U and the new edition of Krown Canada West Countdown U. Yes, there's been a few changes, so let's take you through them. We have teamed up with our conference partner, the Canada West, to bring you all the highlights from basketball and hockey, from the conference play all the way through to the national championships. In addition, we will still give you national coverage of the CIS football scene throughout the winter. If you are just a fan of one of the sports, you'll be able to catch any of our segments on YouTube. But now we will tell you about the worst kept secret in the CIS. That is the Vanier Cup going to Tim Hortons Field in Hamilton for the next 2 years. The CIS made the announcement on Monday.
The Vanier Cup has a great history, and the success in the past 5 years alone in Montreal and in Vancouver and in Laval with the University of Laval. This is a great platform. And I remember the first time I came to the stadium here and how impressed I was when I did the first tour, what a wonderful facility you have in the city. It was when I came here, I knew that with all the successes the Vanier has had as it's grown over the years, this was the next step in terms of presenting the Vanier Cup across Canada.
Meanwhile, in Regina, the Mike Gibson era will be known as the Mike Gibson error after the former Rams coach resigned after just one 0-8 season at the helm of the Horns. Gibson has taken an assistant's job with the Edmonton Eskimos to coordinate their run game and offensive line. The board of directors of the Rams are now in scramble mode to find a successor. The board has indicated they will go on another national search for a coach, but sources close to the organization say the team may opt for an interim boss for 2016. Gibson addressed the media Monday in Regina.
To be quite honest with you, this was a very tough decision for myself and my family. I always tell the players this, and I thoroughly believe it, that this is their football team. It's not the head coach's football team. Better opportunity. I mean, I'm going to a place with a young head coach, a guy that, to be quite honest with you, before the phone rang, I didn't know. I've gotten to know him in our conversations. I think he's dynamic.
There has been no shortage of news surrounding the Vanier Cup champion UBC Thunderbirds during the offseason. Earlier, head coach and director of football operations Blake Nill stopped by. Now joined by Vanier Cup champion head coach Blake Nill of the UBC Thunderbirds. Blake, it's great to be a champion. You didn't bring the trophy in with you, but we have it on the wall there for you. Yeah. I think one of the biggest minuses from being a Vanier Cup champion is that you get a late start at recruiting and you end up having to play catch up by 2, 3, even 4 weeks. Do you feel like you've caught up yet?
Not yet, and you want to know something, that's an accurate statement. I remember back in the St. Mary's Vanier Cup runs we had at St. Mary's, recruiting didn't even start till January. You know, when you had January, February to catch up, to identify, and then March, April, May, and all the way until training camp to sign kids. Literally right now, most teams have identified everyone and are in the final stages of closing everyone. So we've been scrambling quite a bit right from moment one just to get caught up and make sure that we're getting the opportunities at the quality of players we want.
Do the new rules with the blackout windows, do they help a little bit in terms of allowing a coaching staff to pace themselves when it comes to recruiting season?
Absolutely. The blackout rules that we put in place back a few years ago, I remember when they first came in, there was a lot of coaches who were against it. They felt that it tied their hands. Now it's the norm, and I think every coach in the CIS appreciates the opportunity just to take a moment to collect themselves and you know, just move away from the rat race of recruiting.
Now, the challenges that you have with recruiting are many, even though you've got a defending championship team. What sticks out to me, offensive line, maybe a bit of defensive line too. Running back, even though you've had some good athletes in the mix that you might be able to bring back over from defense, and you lose Quinn Van Gilswyk. But I believe you have an answer, a kicker, don't you?
Yeah, you know, specifically, I would say the biggest areas of concern for us our offensive line, which is always a concern of mine. Secondary, I think we need to improve the athletic component of our secondary. We're able, I should say, to bring in a fairly touted recruit in Greg Hutchins, who I think will give us an answer to the vacancy left by Quinn. And we've had some good athletes recruited into the program at tailback. And I don't think we're going to have to make moves from positional moves, primarily Blackwell to back to tailback. I think we have the athletes who can come in and fill the running back role the way it is right now.
I know, looking at running back, one name that's been tossed out there has been Akeel Lynch, because he's a former Penn State player. He's announced his intention to leave Penn State. He has a few years of eligibility left. And, of course, there's the Michael O'Connor connection there. That seems pretty distant, though, doesn't it? It
is, Jim. We reached out to Akeel right away through Michael. I don't have a history with Akeel, but obviously Michael does. And the answer I got back from Michael was that because Akeel has graduated, he can transfer to any NCAA program without sitting, and that's what he's most likely going to choose to do.
Jonathan Kongbo is another player that you had recruited while you were at Calgary. He opted to go down to Wyoming, spent a year in JUCO, the #1 defensive player in terms of being rated as a JUCO player coming out this year. A number of Division I schools after him, but you had him for the Vanier Cup celebration, and you still have some focus on landing this guy. Here's a guy that's going to be interviewed by Nick Saban for the 4th time on Thursday. Right. How do you compete with a guy like Nick Saban?
Well, the big thing is, Jim, again, this is an attitude. I think it's important that I go out and recruit young men like Jonathan Kongbo, who is, a BC native. He lives 30 minutes from the stadium. I have a brief history with Jonathan. I tried to recruit him to University of Calgary. I probably did not do as good a job as I should have at that time. And but we have remained connected, and I owe it to him to show him that, we're not going to go out and say, we don't want you. We do want Jonathan Kongbo in a UBC uniform. We want him to play football here, and we want him to be showcased around minor football in BC as what the possibility of a young man coming out is. But the likelihood of Jonathan Kongbo being in the CIS and specifically, I guess, at UBC is fairly slim, given his reputation and just the fact that he's categorized as a 5-star recruit right now, and is, as you said, the #1 junior college transfer, which a lot of people don't realize. Cam Newton was categorized the same way as the #1 junior college transfer when he came out, and that sort of puts it in perspective right there.
How important is it, though, for you as a recruiter to get the word out there that you're willing to go after kids like that? Does the word then kind of filter down to other potential recruits to say that you're going after the best of the best that's coming out of this country? What sort of value is there in that?
I think that it's critical that a coach goes after the best players out there. And you have to strategize, and you have to say, okay, there's no way we're going to be able to compete with any program in the Southeast Conference in terms of, the on-field product. But there are people who will listen to the academic component. There are people who will listen to the personal component. Just the experience of being in a Canadian university. And to be quite frank, that's how we got Michael O'Connor. If it came down solely to the on-field product, we would not have had a chance. But Michael liked the idea of attending UBC. He happened to come to Vancouver when in the middle of February, when I think we had 3 sunny days of 15 degrees here, and he just fell in love with the place. And so you have to take chances, and we owe it. The CIS owes it to our top Canadian kids to go after them with the passion that we would anyone else.
I'm going to ask you this question, not necessarily on my list, but how important do you think it is down the road that the CIS, even though they do this in women's hockey now, maybe takes a look at a limited number of full ride scholarships in football? Because you can approach recruiting with passion and you can approach recruiting with energy, but you can't approach recruiting on an even footing with Division I schools in the NCAA if you can't offer what they're offering.
And you know what, Jim? At some point, I think the CIS and the football coaches or the administrators are going to have to look at that. The difficulty, of course, comes with the sheer numbers you're talking about. When you start saying, you know, you could maybe say like each program will have the opportunity to possess 2 or 4 or 5 full ride scholarships that include room and board. But the reality is when you start adding an economic component into any formula, you risk the danger of you know, one end of the continuum becoming more distance from the other end. And we all know what that means. There are have programs in the CIS and there are have not programs in the CIS. A challenge that we all face for the betterment of the game is to keep that continuum as close as we can.
Parker Simpson is a kid that a lot of people are looking at as a defensive back, kid out of Kelowna, maybe with similar lineage to Taylor Loeffler, yes. A player that will be probably moving on to a CFL club. What are your thoughts on Simpson, and what are your thoughts on him as a potential two-sport athlete? Because he loves his basketball, and I've talked to a number of football coaches out there who are going after him in recruiting who have also had a side conversation with their basketball coaches.
Well, and you can include us in that mix, you know, like, in fact, my conversations with Parker and with his family is, you know, it may be come down to the fact that Parker may have more of an interest in the basketball component than the football component. However, his potential in terms of the next level or even at the university level may be more situated to football. I know that Kevin Hansen and myself have both been involved in the recruiting of Parker. We're both excited to have the opportunity to showcase our programs to him, and both are very good programs. The basketball program at UBC has been rock solid for decades now. Football-wise, we have a great opportunity in the fact that given the fact that, you know, the success that we've had last year, but we're still very young and still have a lot of holes to fill, you know, specifically in positions where Parker could, you know, maybe compete.
We talked a little bit about the offensive line. Are there any individuals out there you're targeting specifically or have landed at this point that you'd like to talk about?
Well, in regards to our situation with the offensive line, we're fortunate to have an individual who had to sit out last year, Ben Harrington, who I think is going to come in. He was 2-time All-Conference down in a Division II school. He's a big athletic offensive lineman. He's going to help us. But looking at the recruiting class from this year, we're very fortunate to have had Ryan Von Ann commit to the UBC program. And Ryan not only is an outstanding student, he's you know, he's 6'4", he's 270 pounds, he moves very well. He's the prototype of which I've tried to recruit, you know, for the last 20 years, is that big athletic lineman, long lever guys. And we're excited to have Ryan. And you know what? He's going to come into a situation where he maybe have, you know, some expectations to help us this year.
You know, at SFU 2 years ago, you had Jacques Chapdelaine come in. He was an alumnus who lasted less than a year with the college program. You have Mike Gibson just recently this past weekend announced that he was leaving for the CFL after less than a year. I know that you're very competitive and you care a lot about your team, but I also know by talking with you over the years, you also care about the game very much.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about how a move like that impacts the game at this level? And if you're the Regina Rams, do you maybe not take a look at a young coach who is involved in the CIS rather than one of these CFL coordinators or position coaches that might just treat the CIS like a pit stop?
Well, absolutely. You know, you have to look at what's happened. Look at the past and say, okay, when a CFL coach has come into a CIS program, what's his average tenure? What's his success rate? You know, I've known Mike for quite a while now because he was with the Stampeders back in my Calgary tenure. He's an outstanding man, a great ambassador to the game, and a competitor. And you see, the situation is that I haven't talked to Mike about his decision, but it probably comes down a lot of the time to which will give him a better opportunity in the short term of his career path. Where I think you got to be, or where I think CIS schools have to be a little more vigilant with, is that they've got to make sure that especially the coaches are in contracts that don't allow them to make changes this late, because this really affects not only the Regina program but also the league and also the CIS. We need to make sure that our coaches are locked in. And when you look at my history at St. Mary's before I moved to Calgary, I had a 1-month window in my contract. I was under a contract, a 1-month window to look at opportunities when they presented themselves. At Calgary, they chose not to put me under a contract. Even though I had requested it, probably a half dozen times during my time at Calgary, I was told that I would not be offered a contract. So it allows you, when another opportunity comes, to look at it and without any restraints at the other end, just move on. And I'm certain well, I'm not certain, but it's probably what happened with Mike.
If you could give advantage to one of the younger coaches coming up through the system, I mean, we've just seen Kevin McNeil step into a spot in Guelph as the new head coach there. If you could give advice to a younger coach, what would it be now that there's a spot like that open in Regina, or say, for instance, the St. Mary's job that was posted? What sort of advice would you give?
Well, I can speak specifically about both of those. When the St. Mary's job was announced and when Coach Marchese left, I made a phone call to the athletic director there, advocating for two of my coaches at UBC, James Colsey and Greg DeLaval, and I prepped both of them for what St. Mary's, what the opportunity how it would be presented, what the difficulties would be, and I think that we have to, as a head coach, I think you have to push hard for your assistants. And just this afternoon, I know Paul Orzetti was given a call or spoke to someone at Regina. They reached out to him, and Paul sort of sheepishly came to me and said, this happened. And I encouraged Paul. He says, look, even though your life situation may not allow for it right now because of the age of Paul's daughters and whatever, some personal reasons, you should still go through that process. There's opportunities here. The big thing that young coaches have to realize is that you have to make sure that you're in a position that allows for success academically, athletically, and personally for you to move on to your, as your career goals are determined. And they don't come along very often, and I think when one's out there, you have to look long and hard and say, okay, this is an opportunity to get my foot in the door, and I better take full advantage of it.
Before I let you go, what do you think the biggest challenges facing CIS football heading into the 2016 season?
Again, I continually look at the fact that we've got to make sure, this is a bias, but I'm a big advocate to protect the AUS, okay? And you know that. We've had this talk 100 times, and I think that the history of Atlantic Canada, the CIS needs to make sure that Atlantic Canada is looked after, that the AUS, we got to work hard to keep it competitive, to keep it relevant. There's, how many jobs? 10 to 12 full-time jobs there. Opportunities to play in some tremendous environments, and I don't like all the notion of this new playoff format that limits Atlantic Canada. Whatever. I want to fight hard for Atlantic Canada. I have a bias. That's where I got my start. I believe you can have success in Atlantic Canada. We need to protect it, and that's something that I'll speak openly about and candidly for that matter.
It's one thing about protecting it, but how do you make it thrive?
We need, and I talked about a little earlier, we need a strong St. Mary's program, for sure. St. Mary's is the catalyst out there. And if St. Mary's can regain their momentum and continue to raise the bar, the other programs will do the same. Okay, and they need a program there. Maybe it's Coach Cummins and Acadia. Maybe Acadia. Now that Kelly's left Mount Allison, someone needs to get up there and say, okay, we're gonna work hard to become a major role player. And again, I've experienced it. Again, it could be a bias, but I'm very passionate, and I agree with you what you said too, Jim. We can't protect it. We need to go out and help make it stronger so that it can thrive.
Does a school like Dalhousie that has an AFL team, which is a club level team, or a UNB, if they were to step up to the AUS, would that be a plus for them, or would that be just simply diluting the product and creating more competition for players? For a 4-team circuit that really needs to consolidate and step up.
Yeah, the having Dalhousie in the mix would help. So would UNB, a big school, a very prominent athletic school. I think again it comes down to the culture of the conference in a whole. You need a program that's going to lead, and St. Mary's during Coach Utek's time, during my period, was always in the mix nationally, and what that did was that forced the other programs to step up their game, and I think that ultimately that will happen again if one of those programs can find the momentum they need to get the recruiting base back in. And get the athletes there, because there's tremendous coaches there. The athletic talent in the Maritimes has improved, but it still requires a recruiting effort nationally. And I remain hopeful that we'll find a solution to get AUS prominent again.
Well, we could talk about AUS football for another half hour, but you got recruiting to do, and I got to let you go. So Blake, thanks very much for this.
Thank you very much, Jim. Thank you.